Hello and welcome to Chatty AF, the anime feminist podcast, and our ongoing watch-along for Fushigi Yugi. My name is Vrai. I'm an editor and contributor at Anime Feminist, and with me as usual are Caitlin and Dee.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm a writer and contributor at Anime Feminist, as well as running I Have a Heroin Problem.
Hi, I'm Dee. I am a writer and editor for AniFem, and I'm also the owner of the friendly neighborhood anime blog, The Josei Next Door.
Last time we ended the first season of Fushigi Yugi, and this week we went into episodes 28 through 34, which is the trial, which is the search for the Shinzaho and the Genbu trial. Technically, it was 7 episodes, but really it was more like 5.5 because 28 is a recap episode, and about half or to a third of 29 is also flashbacks.
Yeah, because Keisuke's gotta catch up his buddy on what's going on in the book world. So
Figure out library technology.
What am computer?
How do? Have you heard of the card catalog? It's so... and
It's delightful.
Now, listeners from last week may remember that we went in chronological order, which we've been doing on and off. For this one, I wanted to take a slightly different tack and basically do a positive and negative style division, because I think once I start ranting about this run of episodes, it's not going to stop.
It gets pretty bad.
That's fair.
So, let's start with the good things, which include... well, good things. Let's start with some of the other characters. Miaka and Tamahome's relationship starts to become codependent in a really terrible way this run of episodes.
Yeah, I feel like it's
not...
not...
to talk about the good things
well,
first.
I feel like it's not so much good things as it is like things that are... how do I put this? Like, there's some things that are just bad, and we're going to have to talk about how they're just bad. And so I think this early part is more the conversation we can have about everything else that's going on in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair.
So Miaka and Tamahome, they get really insular and codependent this time around, and it's one of those things where, like, it's definitely not healthy. You can kind of understand why it happens in terms of like Tamahome just had his entire family murdered. Yes, he's going to cling very tightly to this person who's very important to him. But it's not really addressed like that in the series.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's more like they're destined lovers who cannot touch each other. And it's very sad.
But it also gives them an excuse for shitty groping slapstick again, which I thought we were over, and we're back to it, and it's annoying.
Yeah.
Well, for a second, it seems like they're going to deal with it in a responsible way, where Nuriko is great and tells Tamahome that he can't just throw himself into certain death at every time, because then guess what? You're dead, and that's not going to help you or her. Like, this is not noble. Right. This is stupid.
Yeah, Nuriko gives good advice this week. Nuriko, like all the other characters...
You're never gonna get laid if you just get yourself killed.
Yeah, Tamahome's driving force is very much at this point like, we can't bang until we summon Suzaku. Let's do this as quickly as possible. And I think Miaka echoes that to a point. She's also very interested in a physical relationship with him, and has to kind of push him away.
But, like, I want to be in favor of this, like the fact that they're so mutually horny and not, like, Miaka is holding out and he is the gross, pervy boyfriend.
Yeah.
But she secretly super wants it.
Right. Oh, God.
Sorry,
yeah.
I've been reading
it's not
manga.
that, at least.
I've read, like, 3 manga in a row where, like, the dude has sex with the girl, like, in her subconscious.
What?
Oh, God.
And it's, like, shown as sexy and not disgusting and creepy.
Fushigi Yugi, it could have been worse.
Fushigi.
Is that our new tagline?
As of this episode on, yes.
I mean, you will have an emotion. That's also still that I think
it's
that
true.
also still holds extremely true.
I had a lot of emotions watching this stretch of episodes.
It's been a roller coaster week. Truthfully, like this show has fucked me up a little bit this week. But
yeah, I think I felt every emotion.
That's accurate. But yeah, so Yeah, that's Tamahome Miaka. I feel like there's not a whole lot else there. I think by virtue of them being more insular, it pushes a lot, almost the entire rest of the cast, like back into sort of like background art almost.
Yeah.
They each kind of get to do like one sort of fun thing, but it's very minor. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Miaka is focusing. She's our perspective character, and she is focusing on Tamahome to the exclusion of everyone else, with the exception of Nuriko, who is kind of, and I'm going to say this and it's going to sound negative and I don't mean it negative, Nuriko's kind of inserting themselves into their interactions, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, I think it's good that Nuriko's like keeping an eye on them and making sure that they don't get so lost in each other's eyes that they forget everything else.
Right. Well, Nuriko's always been the common sense character.
Right.
Like, well, once Nuriko like got over being a catty, jealous girl, they've been the common sense character.
Yeah, like this run of episodes finally realizes that Nuriko is the cool older sibling who has always given good advice, and they only recognize.
It's okay.
But
Are we gonna pull back and get to that later?
No, we can't. We cannot begin this now. But
Okay.
yeah, I did want to say that it's because as these episodes go on, it can be more tempting to get frustrated with Miaka as character. But at this moment, I'm frustrated with the writing more than at her, because it makes sense that she's 15, and of course it's totally sensible for her to never want to see her family or her friends or everything culturally she's ever known.
Yeah.
But
it's okay for her to just completely throw away her life.
But the writing seems to think this is romantic and not deeply stupid.
And this is part of what got me so jaded about Fushigi Yugi for such a long time, is that Miaka is so willing to throw away everything for the sake of being with Tamahome.
Like, girl, there's no indoor plumbing outside of the palace.
What about hair dryers, Miaka? What about hair dryers?
Right? Like, there's so much, like, it shouldn't be this easy of a decision. It shouldn't be a decision at all.
Right.
Like,
no.
She makes it so quickly. Like, he asks her to marry him, and she's like, yeah, sure, let's do it. I'm family? Friends?
What?
Electricity?
Sorry.
Who cares?
Go ahead, Dee.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that's something that's, I'm generally saying this, like, I don't 100% remember because I was not super invested in their relationship the other times I watched the show. I don't really remember how this kind of gets handled going forward, but I'll be kind of curious to see if they don't pull back on that a little bit, because the sense you get from these episodes is that it's very much a spur of the moment. Like, Miyaka's like, well, of course I don't want to say goodbye to Tamahome, so yeah, I'll do this. And then, like, they get to Toron, the capital city of Hokan, and she kind of has this moment where she remembers, like, oh, snow, that's something we get in the winter. Oh, wait, I'm not going to get that anymore. And she seems a little upset about that. And so whether or not the show will, like, really go through with that, or if it is a 15-year-old, like, making this decision very much in the spur of the moment or not, is, again, I genuinely don't remember how it progresses. So
I do remember.
Oh.
Okay.
And like, imagine
maybe not great.
Imagine how cool it would have been if if it had decided to take this decision that is very believable for a 15-year-old in love and very isolated, and then reminded the audience that, oh, she's in a bubble because she's the weird priestess from another world, but she's not just in another time, she's in another country with different gender roles and different, like, mentalities from birth onward and all of that cultural shit.
Well, and also just the idea that, like, it's very, I mean, it's very common, I think, in stories for the woman to, like, give up everything to be with the guy she loves, and
oh yeah, this is definitely a pretty bog standard Highlander romance,
and it doesn't tend to go the other way around either.
It's very rare for it to go the other way around. Yeah.
It's just
not that it's healthy. Yeah, it's not really great either way. I mean, sometimes you do have to go, like, to me, it was kind of funny watching those episodes, because I did sort of chuckle at the idea of, like, oh, we're in a long distance relationship and one of us has to move to the other person's town. Like, it's a very fantastical version of that, but that is kind of the conversation they're having.
Right.
And it's tough, kids.
who-
They are actually having to look at
that's,
this in terms of like practical, like looking at the practicalities of like the future of their relationship at this point. So
Yeah.
I don't like the way they're handling it, but it is interesting that the story is willing to go there. Like, okay, hey, if we're really going to be together, how are we going to do that?
Right. And Yui does turn around and say to Tamahome, "You're just a character in a book."
Yeah, Tamahome's identity crisis begins.
Yeah, which freaks him out. And that is something that the story actually does recognize, is the fact that the Suzaku warriors don't exist.
They exist in our hearts, Caitlin.
I know they exist in our hearts. But you can't just get married on the astral plane.
Says who?
Certainly.
I'm sorry, that's a bit of weird old internet.
Yeah, I was gonna
history
say
right there.
it's good pull. Good pull. Look up Snape wives, everybody.
Oh, it didn't just start with Snape wives. Final Fantasy House is another good one. Anyway, but like, so it sort of looks at like, do these characters actually exist? And and Yui is sort of using that as a defense mechanism of, this doesn't really matter because you're not real. This is all just in a book. But at the same time, like, it's still, what's happening to them is happening to them. Like, the trauma that's happening to them is happening to them. The pain that's happening to them is happening to them. Even if they're in a book, it's really happening. It's honestly kind of an interesting philosophical discussion that we'll save for later because the series gets into it more.
Oh, okay.
In future episodes. But yeah, like these episodes are sort of the start of that. So yeah,
that's good, because I didn't remember if it like brought this whole meta element up to do anything with it, or if it was just another arbitrary relationship roadblock. So that's good.
it's kind of both.
It's both. I'm like, it can be both.
Fushigi Yugi, why not both?
Endless taglines. We got the Blu-ray box sets. We're ready for you. Whoever wants to produce those.
We're on it.
But come on, discotheque.
But
listen,
on the subject of
we've
Yui,
got
that's probably
there.
as good a time as any to talk a little bit about how it's going with the Seiryu Warriors this run of episodes.
I feel really bad for Yui this time around. So this was the point in the original when I was watching as a kid where I was just like done with Yui. I was like, Yui, quit it, stop. And which is, I mean, it's cruel, but I was 13, and so I was like, I don't get why you're still so upset and like intent on defeating your friend who you clearly know didn't really do anything wrong. And this watch through, I sympathize with her a lot because you get the sense from that conversation with Tamahome that she feels like she has no other choice. Like she's trapped.
Yeah,
she just has to keep doing this thing.
Yeah, like Nakago is beyond monstrous this run of episodes.
Oh my god.
He's terrible. I feel so bad for Ashitare.
Yeah, poor Ashitare is just like thrown away like garbage by this dude. Also Soy.
Yeah, so
I'll start to feel real bad for Soy as we go.
I did want to, because you mentioned, I think Caitlin, you mentioned early on that part of the reason Fushigi Yugi is an early reverse harem is editorial mandate. But the villain can be a lady, like a villain warrior can be a lady though. Thanks, editors.
Yeah.
And
well, and that could have been, I mean, I don't want to assume, but that could have been a situation where the series was successful enough that Watase was able to convince them to let her include some more female characters in the same way that Full Metal Alchemist didn't get to have female characters until a little bit later, because it was a success, and then they were like, okay, Arakawa, I guess we'll trust you. So I don't know if that was one of those situations where it was like, I can include another woman? Sweet.
Right.
But yeah, there are, and I mean, Nuriko, we'll talk about Nuriko.
Right.
Nuriko's complicated. But yeah.
Yeah, I will give that.
Okay.
Like, Miaka and the Holy Sword is a genuinely cool scene. Like
God,
that's
yes.
cool.
I love that scene. Like, it's kind of sad that one Seri warrior takes out all of her warriors in one hit, but Miyaka's response to that is she this is another one of those arcs where she steps up in, you almost wish it would happen more, but she does step up kind of like in the key moments. She decides she's going to fight and defend everyone, and then gets yelled at. Like, Tamahome yells at her for saving his ass.
Yeah,
and I get it, you're worried, but come on, dude.
Yeah, you know who told her she did a good job, Nuriko?
True story. In fact, all the other warriors were like into it, and Tamahome was like, "I'm so scared." And I get it. Your entire family was murdered like 3 episodes ago. I get it. You're very concerned,
very traumatized.
Yeah, and not really dealing with it, which can't be good for you.
Yeah, he does not get enough time to really properly grieve.
I mean, I don't know how long they were on that boat, but I'm still going to maintain that he's not really dealing with it.
Right. Like what is the proper grieving time frame for your entire family is dead?
Probably more than a month.
Time.
I'm gonna say
probably a very long time.
Yeah.
But it also varies from person to person because everyone grieves differently.
No, that's also very true. Miyaka with the sword is very cool. And then when she realizes that like fighting the Genbu warriors is getting them absolutely nowhere, and kind of steps forward and goes, "Look, what do you need me to do to prove to you that I deserve this? That we can have this Shinzaho?" And they're like, "Well, we're gonna freeze you solid and see what happens." And she's like, "Let's do it." You gotta give Miyaka credit for being determined,
spunky.
I guess, and spunky. Yeah, she's feisty.
I'll give that to her.
But she also gets punished for it a lot.
Not so much in this stretch of episodes, I don't think. I think in this stretch,
not in this stretch of episodes.
She is cool, and she's kind of, and they get they get the Shinzaho because she's willing to kind of risk herself, and fight for it.
The episode preview shows that next episode.
Yeah, if you watch the episode preview, that might not make a good. Yeah, well, we'll get there eventually.
What are you talking about? There were no more episodes. This is the end of the series.
That would be such a bummer ending for the series, though.
It was a bummer for me.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bummer for all of us.
Yeah.
But I liked the stuff with the Genbu Warriors is fun. I do recommend people read Genbu Kaiden because it's a marked improvement on the original, and you get to hang out with Hikitsu and Tomide some more, and they're good boys.
Yeah, yep.
They're good boys.
Please take this opportunity to go into Genbu Kaiden if you like, because as somebody who hasn't read it, this section is fine. Like, from a metaphorical perspective, I get what it's doing about like the bond between Miaka and her warriors and how they serve that, but I didn't care about these dudes at all.
No, and you're not.
They don't
nobody really did.
Well. They don't come across well in this episode. They're pretty like one-dimensional. Like, first they're like, "Rawr, angry ghost's gonna kill you," and then they're like, "Okay, here's your Shinzaho." But in the Genbu Kaiden manga, they're much more thoroughly rounded characters. By the way, I just want to jump in that episode 34 made really great use of the inappropriately peppy theme song.
Yes,
at the end of the episode.
that fake out is one of my favorite gags, just ever.
And you can only do it once,
right?
Yeah, So I think most of the people listening to this are probably watching it too. But on the off chance you aren't. They get the Shinzaho and the ba-da-ba-ba comes in, and Miyaka's like, "Yeah, we can summon Suzaku," and the music starts building, and then one of the Genbu guys is like, "Just so you know, you need a second Shinzaho to make that work," and the music just smash cuts off, and they're all like, "Wait, what?"
It's a good joke.
Really good.
Like
it's a very good gag, and then Tamahome just breaks.
Yeah, he literally just shatters,
and it's good because like. Tamahome has become one of those characters that I understand what he's going through objectively, but I'm done with him right now.
Yeah.
Like, I'm too busy.
I like
Miaka too much. I like Nuriko too much.
Yeah.
That, like, he's way down the bottom tier of having time for his logical shenanigans. right now he's a character that I understand everything he does and where he's at emotionally. Like, I get it. He's grieving and he's scared to lose Miaka, and that's causing him to lash out because he's a dumb teen and be reckless and be like short-tempered and very focused on the goal. But as the narrative goes, I'm much more invested right now in why Miyaka's upset and everything to do with Nuriko, and it's pushed him far down to the point where, like, I don't know that I have sympathy to spare for you right now.
Well, and I don't think they're doing a particularly good job of kind of reminding the audience of what he's been through recently. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's a matter of just the narrative just kind of assuming, oh, well, and we don't need to keep mentioning it, or if the narrative genuinely is like he's over it, because he's not, clearly. Mm-hmm. But I think that makes it harder to get invested in what's going on with Tamahome, and that his response to it is kind of like, well, now I'm just going to devote my entire life to Miaka.
Because she's the only family he has left.
Yeah, and it's totally
and his
understandable.
Life has always been all about his family.
Yeah. And so it's very understandable from the perspective of, like, the character's kind of backstory and what's been going on with him. But again, I don't know if the series is doing a particularly good job of kind of making that more explicit, and also pointing out that it's not a particularly healthy thing for him to be doing right now.
Right.
It's kind of a short-term coping mechanism that you would hope he would be able to kind of move past and not dedicate his entire existence to this one person.
Yeah,
so.
like even when Nuriko gives him good advice about being more responsible, it's couched in shitty gender essentialism, like, you need to be more of a man or someone will take her from you.
Yeah. God, that's the gender essentialism is much worse in the manga. Even there's a whole arc. There's a whole arc, Vrai, that does not make it into the anime. Wisely, I would say.
It briefly makes it into the OAVs as a gag.
It does, which is about all the time we wanna deal with it. It's So there's an arc before they get to Hokan where their ship crashes and they end up on, like, the island of the Amazon women, and no men are
of women.
Yeah, and no men are allowed, so they all have to dress up they all have to disguise themselves as women, and it's a lot of, like, har man in a dress jokes, and then there's a lot of, like, the women are all pretty evil. Like, they just treat the men as, like, breeding studs or slaves, and they just pluck out their eyes, and it's pretty rough.
Yeah, they just chain them up and pluck out their eyes, and it's death by snoo basically.
I blocked this out of my brain. Good for me.
It's the manga. It's not a good arc. And there's a lot of lines throughout it of like Toski's refuses to fight these women who are trying to kill him because he will not fight women, ever. Tamahome has a line that is just stupid, where it's like, I got away from him. Good thing men are good runners.
What the fuck does that mean?
Is that a stereotype? I didn't even... Are you just making up stereotypes, Tamahome?
Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Well, women are slowed down by
bad.
their birth and hips,
Yes, that's true.
All those babies up in there,
and they're swinging pendulous breasts. They get in the way. They get in the way. They get
distracted by the feeling of their nipples against the fabric.
According to a lot of male novelists, yes.
Yeah, you start breasted googly down the stairs, and then that's your whole day.
Yeah, and you can't. It chafes, and you can't deal with it. So,
I mean, I've had days like that.
Apparently, so do guys, though. I mean, guys also have nipples. Anime might tell you otherwise, but. Yeah. So there's a lot of shitty gender essentialism in this bit. And it kind of makes me sad because when I read comments from Watase, you definitely get the sense that she is frustrated by the gender norms of the time, but does not know how to address or approach that. So it comes out in comments about, like, when they ask her, like, in this 1995 interview I found. I think I shared this with you guys. There's a comment where they ask her, like, if you were reincarnated, what would you want to be reincarnated as? And she says, a good-looking boy in a school uniform so I could pick up girls, and I'd grow up to be a manga artist for boys. And I'm like, yeah, okay, there's clear, like, and she talks a lot about how she wanted to be a shonen manga artist and kind of was basically told no. And
Right.
so it's
Rumiko Takahashi
kind of sad.
had been working for years.
She had, but she was. I think she was very much an exception to the rule. I don't think there was much beyond that at that point. There's a lot more female like shonen and oh my god, I blank seinen manga artists now, but I think that was a lot less common back then. I think Takahashi was kind of an exception to the rule.
Well, Watase's bullshit with gender kind of reminds me of Poppy Z. Bright, who is a trans male author of vampire novels, and like he wrote some books in the 90s before he transitioned that has a lot to do with like body horror and women who like a rules for vampirism where like being pregnant will kill you 100% of the time, and you can tell he's like working out his personal body dysphoria a lot through these novels, but it ends up being like, oh, you wrote a novel where all of the women are completely unimportant objects who get raped and then die from pregnancy. Whoops.
Yeah, no, I mean it does not excuse the shitty things that happen in some of her stories, and especially in some of her earlier stories. But it strikes me as it's an interesting layer to it, and like internalized gender norms and misogyny are a hell of a drug, basically. And so like reading over some of her old interviews, and she kind of like, I hadn't really thought about it until this week, but she kind of like punishes femininity in an interesting way sometimes.
She does.
Not female characters necessarily, but like like more traditional like feminine behaviors.
Yeah, and this is why I said Fushigi Yugi you can see a lot of Watase's anxieties reflected in the series, I think. You know, through stuff like gender norms and gender relations and sort of how those are handled, you know, being forced into a rivalry with your best friend and it goes sour. Like, I wonder if she has had something like that happen in her life.
Well, and there's a lot with like the parents telling them like, oh, you have to compete, you know, you're both going to the same school, like this is how it works, and the frustrations of that coming out in the story.
Like, I know that one of the things that can be appealing, at least or I think better early on about Fushigi Yugi is that emotional rawness of being frustrated at these things. But now as the story starts to get into the part of the story where you expect it to do something with those things, I don't think she's processed these feelings she has in a way that can like make the story hit home, as opposed to
it's still kind of that snapshot I mentioned last week, as opposed to like actual commentary on these things that are not great or frustrating or part of, you know, growing up as a teenager at that point in time.
Right, and
it's very raw, like, and that's a strength and a weakness. And right now, it's more weakness than strength.
Yeah, and I think the cost of that rawness, at least for her, is you've reinforced these things instead of taking your frustration and doing something about it.
Yeah, whether intentionally or no, and I think we'll get into that more in the second half here when we kind of start talking about everything with Nuriko. Before, I think we're probably about ready for that. As terms of other kind of more positive or just more pleasant things.
Keisuke's a good boy.
Keisuke is a good boy. He's very concerned for his sister and just wants her out of that damn book.
Yeah, well, because he's worried that she's gonna get terribly hurt. Which the thing with the hair is probably one of the biggest ass pulls I've ever seen.
It is.
Like,
in the manga, it makes more sense because there's a ribbon involved. Like, they knew about this connection.
Yeah, but like, it's like, oh, he happens to find a hair. And when Miaka wants to cut off that condition, she just grabs some bangs and burns it, and that takes care of it.
Yep.
Whereas I feel like she would have to shave her head to fix that.
That would make more sense.
Which would be hilarious.
Also the introduction of this other asshole because Keisuke needs somebody to talk to.
Oh yeah, Tetsuya.
Tetsuya, his friend, who I cannot see without getting that song stuck in my head. He wears his sunglasses at night, you guys.
Yeah, while driving.
That will eventually happen.
Upset.
And it's pretty great.
That made me really upset.
It's safe. Happened. It's very safe.
But
Tetsuya's all right. Yeah. He doesn't really get to do much, but he's all right.
No, he just blatantly exists because we need somebody, like the character cannot exist in a vacuum and needs to dialogue about his worries, I guess.
Yeah, well, in this way, Keisuke can research while Tetsuya reads the book, so they can be multitasking too.
Yeah, all the stuff about The Genbu priestess.
who was apparently murdered by her father. So we're told.
So is that is that a thing that gets retconned in Genbu Kaiden?
Not retconned, but it gets addressed. It gets
Yes.
It's absolutely explained, and it is part of the narrative. And I don't want to say
and-
anything more than that. The stuff that is said in the original Fushigi Yugi does not get retconned in Genbu Kaiden. It just doesn't maybe happen the way you'd 100% expect.
It handles it pretty well, and like Genbu Kaiden is a much more polished narrative. Because it's God, how many years later?
At least 10. I'm maybe closer to 15.
Yeah, but like Genbu Kaiden is interesting, because you start reading it and you know what happens to Tokiko, the main character.
Takiko.
Takiko, thank you. You know what happens to Takiko, and you know that it's gonna be just a really just awful, sad ending. So you're sort of prepared for it, but you also don't know how it's going to go.
And it surprises you along the way. Like it doesn't happen exactly the way you expect.
It's,
I recommend it. I think it would be fun to do like a one-shot podcast, like book club on it at some point. Once we're done with this.
Yeah, if I could find a way to get hold of it, I'd do that.
That would be the trick is getting you some copies of the volume, because I think Caitlin and I just have it.
no, I checked it out at the library.
Oh, okay.
But they don't have all the volumes.
But yeah, well, I mean, we can check. Maybe if the readers are interested, they can leave feedback, and we'll check in with that like at a later date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe someday.
Yeah. Is there? Oh, there is one more good thing that I wanted to give the episode props for. In a show that is very much about, at least this run of episodes is about stupid emotional decisions that lead you to do bad things. It does cap off with a pretty good and mature, having Mitsukake have a pretty good speech about how grief is okay and it's hard, and if you don't deal with it right away, that's fine.
And it's okay to grieve, but then there is kind of that hard practicality of like we don't. I wish we had time to just be sad for a while, but we don't. We have to keep going. And so balancing that sense of like, yeah, it's 100% okay to be sad, but we can't be paralyzed. Moving. Basically, you have to kind of take that tiny step.
And I think that's I think the episodes leading up to Nuriko's death were a fucking trash fire of gender dynamics and gender norms and 90s ideas, like 90s misconceptions of how gender and sexuality work. But I think that whole episode was really well done.
It's I mean even in the context of God, this is really hard for me to talk about. In the context of everything that comes before it, it's hard to talk about. It's hard to look at it and say like it did things well, but it's really affecting, and I still think it's one of the better death scenes I've ever seen in anime in terms of.
I was crying genuine tears.
Me too,
like,
and I've seen this like 6 times, and I was still crying.
Exactly. Like no matter how many times I watch it, like it hurts.
It really does, and it
hurts.
It's one of those. It's a noble death. Nuriko is loyal and fierce and stubborn, and and it's the kind of noble on the battlefield kind of death you see in a lot of kind of epic stories, and it's a good send off for them, I think, and it is it's devastating. Like everyone is devastated.
Like there is a very real sense of loss, and there's a very real sense of this is what's happening now. Like we messed up, and now things are so much more harder and scarier than they ever were.
And really just kind of on that raw immediate level of this was somebody we loved and they're gone.
Yeah.
And that sense of Nuriko as a beloved member of the team, and God, Toski, noble beacon of light amidst the badlands of these
baby.
12 episodes.
Oh. He's good, and I ship them so unironically now. like fuck.
That's going to be a rare pair right there.
But they're so good. They're so good, and he's the only one who is like shitty, but in a way that's clearly part of that give and take dynamic, and just loves.
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
I don't ship them, but I love their relationship and their friendship. And again, it's that rawness, which is not always necessarily a good thing, but it is very affecting even now. And it's difficult to divorce that kind of gut punch emotional reaction I have to, again, what I think is an extremely well done death sequence with these more kind of emotional, more intellectual issues of like how much this arc gets wrong and fucks up.
Yeah, so shall we get into it, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay.
There is one more, as more of a general note. I've been, because like, I knew getting into, this is the point where I stopped reading the manga, more or less. Partly because that was just what was available for the flipped volumes, but also because I was super upset as a kid that Nuriko died. So I remembered vaguely that they died. And I remembered the dead sister shit. The bullshit explanation dead sister shit, and also that Nuriko turned out to be in love with Miaka, but I didn't remember how bullshit it was, like to the point where I wish I could go back and add a retrospective like issue for, I think if somebody hasn't seen this before, like trans people, I would almost warn them off of this entirely, because it hurts so bad to love this character so much and then to have things end up this way. Like, it's so affecting, more so than the usual shitty representation, because you have all these episodes of such a great character, and to have it turn at the last moment and then kill them off. And to specifically frame these issues of the characters were, like, other members of the team gave Nuriko shit for, and then start giving them props for cool things they were doing all along, like nothing changes except that Nuriko starts presenting more masculinely. Like, that's shitty.
Oh, I feel like I'm talking to a big brother.
Right.
Like, it's not any different from how Nuriko talked to you before. Just, like, now you're respecting them more because they're presenting masculine.
Right. And the other thing...
Well, sort of. So this is why the pronouns are difficult with Nuriko, is because the narrative kind of feels like it's kind of trying to erase that sort of gender fluid, trans, queerness. I'm not 100% sure what word we should use, because again, the narrative is a mess, so it's hard to know exactly how to talk about it. But Nuriko, like, appearance-wise, starts presenting more masculine, but continues to use feminine speech patterns and continues to refer to themselves as Atashi throughout all of this. During their fight with Ashitare, they slip into masculine speech patterns a little bit. Like, they refer to Ashitare as omae, which is a more kind of gruff way of saying you. And the sentence structure is... So, folks who don't know Japanese, gender presentation is kind of built into a lot of the language, especially in terms of casual speech, like the particles you use, kind of the way you end your sentences, personal pronouns, especially that one's fairly more well known. And that's kind of what I'm talking about here. So Nuriko's speech patterns when fighting Ashitare get more kind of aggressive and kind of that masculine coded, but they keep referring to themselves as Atashi throughout all of that. And then once the fight is over, they switch back to those more feminine speech patterns. So,
and I've been watching the dub.
Yeah.
Because that is what I watched growing up, and that's sort of what I have the most emotional connection with, even though it is ridiculous a lot of the time. And so, Nuriko is voiced by a woman, and English doesn't have as strongly gendered speech patterns. It does, but it's not as, like,
immediately
clearly
noticeable.
Encoded.
Right.
But Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who is lovely, and probably one of the better actors in this show, she, like, she's got a lower voice already, and she dropped her voice for this stretch of episodes.
Huh.
Yeah. Like, I mean, not like super noticeably, but noticeably, but not like super obviously. So yeah, that's sort of interesting.
Yeah,
It's kind of like how Tamahome turned into Solid Snake for a while when he was evil.
nice. I struggle with the as I rewatch the series and remember kind of more of the details of Noriko's character, I've struggled with the pronouns because I think them is good for where Noriko ended up, and what a better writer could do with their character arc, and this issue of, you fainted, you went hard in this certain manner of presentation and would have ended up in more of a fluid sort of center of the spectrum kind of presentation if they hadn't fucking killed them off. But at the same time, part of me regrets not using she for the earlier stuff, especially because other characters are take such pains to erase Noriko's chosen presentation, chosen set of pronouns, and there are also like clear indications that she wanted to become a cis woman, at least at when she was in certain headspaces. And I know, it was connected to this issue of that's what will make me, worthy to Hotohori, and there's like all sorts of things, but like we can't get into that too much because Nuriko is a cool older sibling for Miaka, our protagonist, and we're never in their head. And like it's difficult, and the fact that the most interesting gender fluidity stuff for Nuriko here at the end is tied up into, I got over my tragedy and now I'm a man again.
Yeah.
And would have continued on that trend if I hadn't died, because that's such a shitty stereotype that like trans people are broken.
That's a shitty stereotype that comes up with most queer identities, that this idea that there has to be some reason, some trauma in your backstory that makes you that way, and it's shitty, it's bad. I don't have anything else to add to that. It sucks.
And it's there's this sort of very 90s conflation of gender and orientation.
Bisexuals, how do they even fucking work?
But the bisexuals don't exist.
No.
Well, I mean, arguably Nuriko is bisexual. It's just that when Nuriko decides that they like somebody of a particular gender, they immediately switch their own gender, which is not how it works for most people.
Yeah, but like, so I've been reading Baby and Me, which is another 90s manga. And there's a side character whose dad is very feminine presenting, but heterosexual. And, like, stays at home and cooks and cleans and does all of the traditionally feminine functions. But in this manga, he says that he is not gay because he has the soul of a man, and gay men have the souls of women. So, which Baby and Me, I think, is published around the same time as Fushigi Yugi. Like, it's very 90s. So that's sort of illustrative of, like, that's just sort of how they thought of it. And, like, now we know that's completely wrong. That's horrible, and it doesn't excuse it. But it's also, like, it's a product of its time.
Well, yes and no, because, like, the anime immediately lost points with me when it pulled out the term new half, which I spent a lot of this series gritting my teeth through people calling Nuriko and Okama, because I assumed that new half was a more recent term. It was the chosen term of the Japanese trans community until maybe 5-10 years ago. And I thought that it was from the late 90s, but no, it's from the 70s or 80s. And if you pulled out this term for a single one-off gag, you fucking knew better, and you were just being shitty then on purpose. And I lost all of the benefit of the doubt that I had for, it's for the 90s.
That was in the manga. I wonder if, like, that line was added in the anime. I don't know because I haven't read the manga in Japanese.
Yeah, me neither. I know the term new half is not used in that scene in the manga, but I don't know if that was because they chose to translate it in a different way, or if it wasn't there at all. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean in the anime they don't say new half either. In the anime they say cross dresser.
Oh, in the
Oh, in the dub.
Yeah, in the dub I should say.
Yeah, it's it was just this moment of like, it still sucks when stereotypes happen and it's just like, oh, you just have no idea of these people that you're othering for the sake of a shit joke. But it's like, oh, you did the bare minimum of research and then you chose to be a fucking asshole. And then I was just really angry at it from that point on. It's like it feels like the structure of this arc is, we need to dig a bunch into Nuriko because they're going to die. So we need to get into all the backstory and all of the secret feelings that they were harboring. I don't necessarily hate that they have feelings for Miaka. I like them better as a friendship, but fine, whatever. I hate the way it was revealed and tied to Nuriko's gender so specifically.
Yeah, no, it's awful.
It's played up a lot more in the anime too, like that weird, shitty, like fantasy of them in the real world,
oh,
like
God.
as like a cis couple, which is bad for a lot of reasons. Because one, I think it's very like even as poorly as Nuriko is written, I think that scene is untrue to the character that Watase was going for in terms of the person Nuriko ends up being. But it's like this whole, and it also plays up this element of like, oh, Nuriko secretly really wanted to be Miyaka's like romantic partner, and in the anime you really don't get that sense. Like there's this sense of like, yeah, I love her, but I want the two of you to be happy, and I love all of you too. Like it's much more this sense of, I found this community that I really care about, and I'm proud and comfortable with you guys.
Yeah,
as opposed to just, oh, I'm part of Miyaka's harem.
Right. Like, oh, the true tragedy of Nuriko's death is that they didn't get a chance to be a cis dude and be Miyaka's boyfriend. Like,
They just did not get to make out with Miaka.
And I don't know how to talk about this without spoiling stuff or making it sound like they collect the Dragon Balls and bring Nuriko back to life, which they're pretty explicit about. Like, that's not how this universe works. When people die, they die. But we haven't seeing the end of Nuriko exactly. There's a little bit more to Nuriko's story in the OVAs. That's all I can say with it.
Which I have a different set of herms with, but we'll get to it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't. God, I feel like I'm like trying to brush aside your concerns and complaints, and I'm not.
No, I know.
100% right. And there's a lot in this arc that I can't excuse. I don't want to even try to defend. But there's also a lot in Nuriko's character that resonates with me, and so it's really difficult for me to toe that line of the personal importance that some of what happens here was for me, and then the more broader harmful elements of it, because it's hurtful and bad, and there's no excusing that.
Right. Well, I think it's fair to say that it wouldn't have been so deeply personally painful for me if I didn't love Nuriko like a lot. Like I want a universe where their character is more respectfully handled and they get to like explore this issue of, I felt compelled to. I first felt like, even if we have to take the shitty dead sister stuff, like I think you could salvage something out of, I felt compelled to present this way, but then I decided that but then I realized that I felt it, but now now I feel the need to swing the other way, but I don't have to do that either. And
yeah, well, and I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation in terms of a character who's growing up in dynastic China, where obviously there were trans people, but it wasn't like you could get online and find out about other trans people.
Right.
So I think the idea of a trans or gender fluid character growing up in this society where the only way they really knew how to express that was through like a female figure in their lives who is important to them. I think that's a very interesting narrative thread. That's not what the story does, but it is kind of dipping into the light novels a little bit, because y'all know I love to bring up my esoteric Fushigi Yugi knowledge.
This is why we love you.
Well, they kind of go this route with Nuriko's light novel, because it takes place like right before they join the harem, and they are in this like little village in the overarching plot doesn't really matter, so I'm not going to get super deep into that. But they have no interest in joining the harem. Like, they don't know jack about the emperor. They don't care. They meet while they're spending time in this village with like some distant relatives. They meet this girl who they end up having like a really, like, it's like a rivalry, and then they end up becoming like very close. And the girl dies because Fushigi Yugi is littered with dead women. But this girl that they met had this backstory where Hotohori, like, as a child, had like helped her out, and so she wanted to meet him and like thank him for that, and so she wanted to be part of his harem. So when she dies, Nuriko has this feeling like, oh, I'll do that in your place. And so there's definitely this kind of ongoing arc with Nuriko of like kind of taking on the characteristics or the desires of these important women surrounding them. But in the light novel, one of the good things is they get to the palace, they meet Hotohori, and they fall in love with him for real. They fall in love with Hotohori for real. So it's not just like I'm going to pretend to be gay for this other person. It's like, no, I initially came here for this person, but I do have these feelings. They are drawn to the fact that Hotohori seems kind and lonely. And we've talked about how Hotohori is trash.
Right, like Nuriko.
Nuriko may not have the best of taste in men, but...
I mean, they were vulnerable.
They want to... Well, I mean, they are a fixer. They want to fix people.
Yeah, and I think
true.
Nuriko recognized kind of a shared kind of sense of isolation and loneliness in Hotohori that they themselves feel. And I think that's sort of where that bond and that wanting to be a part of, to help them, came from. So anyway, point of that story is that narrative of a queer person not knowing how to express that in a society where you wouldn't necessarily have access to an understanding of being trans or being gay or anything like that. I think that could be very interesting. I think it sucks that the anime does not do that. The anime doesn't seem to know what it wants to do. Sorry, Vrai, go.
No, it's just, well, like that idea of that Nuriko doesn't have their own identity outside of helping other people, doing what other people want for them, is very interesting. I wish it had gone into that.
Yeah. And it feels like it almost wants to, because there's this sense at the end of like, well, this is the person I want to be. This is who I want to be is with you guys. But I don't think it's handled very well.
There's a really good show hiding somewhere in Fushigi Yugi. There's a really good show hiding in there.
Crunchyroll, give me 39 episodes and a lot of money, and I'll fix it for you. I'll do the remake.
Right.
I really want to.
Well, and and also like that one line in isolation that makes me really mad in context, like the line of that Nuriko wasn't a man or a woman, they were just Nuriko. That's nice in theory by itself, but then you put it into the context of, no, fuck you. You were shitty to them for 32 episodes in varying ways. Fuck you. And I'd be more inclined to like recommend like to categorize Nuriko as, yes, the anime and the manga handle them poorly, but there is still some interesting ideas you could salvage out of this character if they didn't die. Like the fact that they do all this and then Nuriko dies makes it impossible to be like, yes, invest your heart and soul in this character because you're going to see your representation dead again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was not aware of the bury your gays trope at the age of 13.
Yeah.
I did not. I think in a universe where that isn't a trope, again, this is a very good, noble. This isn't Nuriko doesn't die because society kills them, like society destroys them for being queer. Nuriko doesn't die because as punishment for being queer. It's out in, again, you can't separate things from context, so I don't even know why I'm talking about this. But
I mean, there's room for to talk about it with some nuance. Like, yes, this exists in this context, but also, this is...
It's just a case of sometimes the context is bigger than what you wanted to do with a story.
Yeah.
And in this case...
You can see where it's going for, but... This is, like, the context changes that. I don't know. I think there's room for both. Yeah. And yeah, like, outside of the context of bury your gays, then it's just a really powerful episode, but it's also... And I don't think, bury your gaze was something that, you know, anyone had in mind when they worked on this episode.
Song of Wind and Trees, the Dead Gaze manga.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that it didn't exist at the time, but like, you know, it's easy to, and like, I'm saying this because I have written a story that culminated in sad dead gaze. Like, and I wasn't thinking about it as like a bury your gaze thing. I was thinking about like, I'm gonna write this tragedy, and like from the outset, like this is gonna be a sad romance, and then deciding to make both of the characters male because of reasons. Like, you know, you can do it without really having that context in mind, you know, and just thinking of it as like, you know, something that's tragic, but at the same time that context exists,
right? And I've
and what you meant doesn't, you know, it does and does not matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's one of the, well, like I've enjoyed stories that included I enjoy the Adventure Zone, and I felt that when it had some dead gays, which it does, spoilers, it built it up very well in a way that was narratively justified. I think Fushigi Yugi is something different, where it not only had dead gays who were, you know, gays incidentally and then died, and then that still played into a larger harmful trope. Nuriko might not die directly because they're queer, but they're treated so badly because they're queer, and then they die nobly and speaking masculinely. Like, their brave moment is them really committing to this masculine presentation, and that is what I think, in some ways, the framing adds nobility to their death. Like, yes, it's a great noble death episode in isolation, but it can't exist in isolation. It's part of a series.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, it's true.
No, you're right.
Because, yeah, I want to give that episode credit. It's very well done. I like a lot of the reactions of the rest of the cast, and there are some good lines that if they didn't have the context of the rest of the series around it, I'd be like, yeah, cool. But I can't. Like, boy, I'm going to have a harder time being nice to this series going forward.
Oh, and the next 6 episodes are a nightmare.
Yeah, we've now entered the time where I no longer know what's going on, so I'm totally with a newbie viewer.
Yeah, to give you an idea, clearly I love this show too much, and I have seen it like 5 to 6 times. I think this is number 6. I've only seen the next 6 episodes, maybe 3 of those times. I skip them when I watch the show. We're gonna get through it, and if our listeners, guys, if you get started and you're like, nope, we'll walk you through it, and then you can join us on the other side.
When it's good again.
We'll pull you through this. It's 12 rough episodes, and this arc that we had here, I mean, as we've talked about, has a lot of bad in it. I think there is some good mixed in with that. The 6 after that, there's less of that. It's tough. It's a rough stretch. Because it feels like they keep trying to kind of like explain and then backtrack and then go, oh, well, Noriko's really a man, and then like, no, Noriko's both, and it's such a fucking mess, and it's hurtful. You're right. And it's not.
I am sort of interested in the fact that you know, the manga translation, they use he and him for Nuriko, right? Yeah.
No, the manga uses she throughout all of this.
Really? Okay, because I was talking with
one
of our contributors who mentioned an interview with I think a translator where they regretted like not using she and her. Maybe they were talking about the dub.
So what it was they used he for most of the series, but they switched to she for this storyline. And the translator wrote a whole column in the back of the volume about how this is, you know, because this was the time when it took, like, there was like two chapters being translated a month for a while because it was running in a magazine. So, like, you know, things changed during the course of the publication, and the public perceptions of things changed, and people's knowledge about things changed. And this was honestly like one of my first exposures to this idea that like you refer to trans people by the pronouns they want, like, you know, and saying that's like Nuriko lived as a woman, you know, referred to themselves as a woman for this entire series, and we're going to respect that. In their, you know, in the Japanese they don't have the pronouns, but since we can't do that in English, we're going to choose to respect her in her final moments by using female pronouns, and the other, we're going to have that those characters do that. And honestly, that was, I remember reading that so clearly because that was really like, you know, the first time that I had it that laid out for me. Because it was, you know, like, I was not like hateful, but I was a little bit ignorant at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think especially younger people know how far and how fast trans activism has come in the last 5 years alone.
Yeah. Like like until fairly recently, it was more or less a curiosity.
Yeah. To put it in perspective for you guys, there was a short, the press has gone under, but in 2014, I published a short story in an anthology, and my author bio used gendered pronouns because I didn't think you could do that in a professional context. That was 3 years ago.
Yeah. So yeah, like, that was honestly a fairly formative experience for me.
I have kind of, I mean, again, as much of a fucking mess as a lot of this is, I kind of had that same, that line you brought up, Vrai, about wasn't a man or a woman, Nuriko was just Nuriko, was kind of a revelation for me, that you could just be yourself and fuck labels. And that stuck with me like a lot. Like there were times in high school where it would be like, "Hi, I'm D. Please don't treat me like a girl. That's weird." And I don't know how to. Yeah, it's complicated. But it was just that idea that like, especially in the early aughts, where there was very much that sense of like, what like girls were like this and guys were like this, and and those, you know, really those
bad at that time.
Those social constructs around it, and so then you had this character who was kind of existing in this kind of gray area, and this idea of like they were themselves, they were their name, and I was like, that's that right there, that's good, that's what I like.
And you know what, to briefly give that some credit, this is so much more nuanced and better than what's fucking up, Persona 4. You didn't think I was coming for you, but I was coming for you.
I was waiting.
The surprise Persona 4 jump. Get him. I don't have any emotional connection to this. Get him, right?
Well, the brief thing about Persona 4 is it thought it was doing a feminist thing, but it co-opted the language of of the trans experience to do a spooky gotcha, and I fucking hate it. Like, it wanted to do a thing about a woman in a male-dominated workforce, but it definitely co-opted. She thinks she wants to be a man and has to do that to do this, and I hate it. I hate it because I thought I had a cool gender nonconforming or trans dude anime character. I hate it.
Yeah,
that would be. It's frustrating. There's so much in this series that is a mess, and it's again reconciling that. How much of it has not aged well, and how much of it was not good at the time, probably for a lot of people. With nevertheless kind of having this impact, I guess, is difficult, and I don't want to try to like mitigate it or minimize it, because I don't think we should. I think it deserves to get dragged. And I'm glad that you talked about that, like on Twitter, especially, Vrai.
Well, and like I said, the fact that they die, I would warn trans people off of watching this show in a way that I wouldn't if they lived, and like the writing just stumbled a lot around this issue.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously something that has been, you know, very powerful for all of us in some way or another, and like really did affect affect us personally in some way or another, in both good and bad ways. It's not. I don't think it can simply be boiled down to this is bad. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can be boiled down to this is bad, but
yeah, no, I see what you mean.
this is,
in spite of it all, Nuriko is still a character I love. Sorry, go on.
yeah. Nuriko is a character that we all love. Nuriko is a character that affected us deeply, and their story affected us deeply, and made impressions on us when we were growing up. And I'm honestly getting a little fucked up right now because I'm really sad and I'm gonna miss them for the rest of the series. Even though I can go back and watch those episodes anytime, it's just not it's not the same.
They're just characters in a book. You guys, shut up.
Oh God. Fushigi Yugi, you will feel an emotion.
You will have an emotion.
You'll have an emotion.
I'm
having a lot of emotions right now.
Yeah, I've been kind of a mess the past couple of days, just thinking about talking about all of this, because I think at a certain point it is inevitably going to get very personal, and that can be very difficult, especially when those personal reactions can be very different. Yeah, this has been a rough one. I think for all of us a little bit, but we've gone over an hour, and I think at this point we're all just having emotions.
Yeah, I think so. Next week it will just be I think Salt with no emotions, only anger.
Oh
yeah.
Next week I'm gonna get drunk because that's the only way I can get through these episodes that we're about to get to. I'm gonna watch them drunk, and then I need to be in the same mindset for the podcast. So
should we do an even evening recording for that?
That might not be a bad plan. Yeah.
Yeah, but just really get that salt going.
I'll get a bottle of wine. I'll join you.
Right.
Okay. Good. Yeah, and listeners, I am not kidding. We should have had this note at the end of the last podcast. This 12 episode stretch is rough, and when we get to the end of it, we are going to go back to a more kind of more serious but still kind of a fun adventure fantasy story. We will come out the other side. But if you start to watch this next stretch and you're like, nope, can't do it, this isn't, no, I don't blame you. I will not judge you. Come to us. We will give you a quick recap, let you know what happened, and then you can just pick up at the end of them. We're willing to do that for you, our dear listeners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate that I chose this time to write a whole bunch about how Fushigi Yugi still holds a lot of power, because we're getting to the part where it's just unforgivably bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have that to look forward to.
Yay!
Yay!
So the next run of episodes is, I believe, 6. I believe we are doing 6 episodes next time. Yeah, I have it starred here. It is 35 through 40. And in the meantime, I guess that's about us ready to wrap up, huh?
Yeah, take us out of this this whirlpool of feelings.
All right, I'll lead us back to safety. So if you liked this podcast, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/animefeminist. $1 a month really does help. It helps us pay our editor for the podcasts, which we can get to you weekly now. It helps us pay our contributors a fair amount. It helps us pay our editors. So it might not seem like a lot, but it really does help. 10 people giving $1 means more than one person giving 10, if you follow me. You can also follow us on Twitter at animefeminist, on Facebook at animefem, and we always, if you would like to pitch to us, we're always open for pitches on anime, or particularly on manga. We would love to hear from you guys. And I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this very rough run of episodes.